So, all right, we're going to talk about difficulties in atypical communication and language. So what this means is it's not necessarily like verbal language that is difficulties in language, right? It's more of kind of like a foreign language would in a brain need to be transferring information to articulate it outward in another language, right? So that's the most similar thing that I can compare it to when we're talking about difficulties in atypical communication and language. And what that also is that understanding what words mean. A lot, I'm sure you've heard this a lot, that students with autism struggle with metaphoric language. True and not true. I have students who are awesome creative writers who can go there, but with clear direction, right? I have other students who just don't get it, and it's really hard. But in general, writing is hard for students, so it can be a struggle for them to write a paper because they don't relate to it at all, and be able to expand on that piece of information, because it's like, I'm giving you the answer, it's yes or no, I don't understand what else you want from me, right? So the difficulties in communicating outward and inward through that brain to articulate what is going on is what we're talking about, difficulties in that aspect. So we're going to go over some of the stigma and the facts related to the stigma. We're not going to go through all of these, but this is something that y'all can check out for yourself and read through. All right, and Juan, take it away.
All right, so I'm here to talk about some difficulties in atypical language and communication. And I'm going to go through this somewhat quickly. So just to sum things up, with regards to communication, the gift of time is great. So for example, let's take the first stigma that autistic people uh, are unable to communicate. But again, that's usually not the case for most people. And in my experience, sometimes if I take a little longer to answer, if I seem silent for a few seconds, I'm just processing it, and I will give you an answer. And sometimes I can respond very quickly, but sometimes I just need a minute or so. And so the same thing regarding to, getting stuck on ideas. I can be very passionate about certain ideas I hold, and so can a lot of other people. So it can be hard to handle disagreements regarding ideas. Uh, and it can be especially hard to deal with severe criticism of an idea you happen to like. But again, this is something that uh, can be learned over time. And so in my case, I find it's a lot easier to accept, different thoughts on the same idea. And of course, to accept that some people don't necessarily like things I like. And with regards to being unresponsive, sometimes this is seen as rude. But again, the gift of time is great. Uh, Gesturing can be problematic because a lot of autistic people either aren't so familiar with body language or it's not given so much attention. A perfect example of this is pointing. In my experience, if someone says, "Hey, look over there," and points, uh, it can be pretty difficult for me to figure out what they're pointing at. So in a lot of cases, I think, or I'll even say, what exactly are you pointing at? And it can, I need a little time for that. But again, that's one of those things where with a little guidance and patience, I can see from your perspective. The same with interrupting. That's not being rude. It's just an attempt to be very clear that I'm understanding what you're saying. Uh, because again, sometimes it can seem that maybe an autistic person is not paying attention. Uh, so if someone interrupts just to say something, that can be an explicit attempt just to prove that you're listening, and it should be treated as such. Now, for joining groups, sometimes, of course, a lot of autistic people tend to be introverts, so the preference is to be alone. But uh, a lot of times it's not, autistic people don't resist groups just because we don't like people. It's just sometimes we're okay being on our own. Sometimes we might not get that, being in groups is just uh, one of those important implicit things that are important for forming friendships, networking, and things like that. And again, just a little bit of time, and it can become very clear to many autistic people that we should uh, just get in a group and not not worry so much about whether or not we are doing uh, the wrong things or just being too self-conscious. The same goes for completing tasks, asking questions. Uh, Sometimes autistic people will focus on a very particular thing, especially if it interests them. So that's why uh, we might go at a different pace, especially if we are interested in something, or if we're not interested at all. It could be that, well, again, if we're not interested in something, that could make it seem like we don't care at all. And uh, but again, if that's why clear expectations are important. So in a class, I think it's important for professors to say, oh, by the way, such and such information is important for you to learn. It's going to be on the test, etc. And with those clear expectations, it's very helpful for autistic students to do well in the class. And for the final one, which, oh yes, this is a common one too, about being defensive. Uh, Again, if it seems that maybe we don't pick up on certain jokes or sarcasm, uh, or especially with teasing, it can come off as aggressive, and which is why because of course, a lot of that is due to autistic people being bullied when they were younger, and so that's why uh, sarcasm or teasing can come off as mean, and which is why some people can be very defensive about that. But again, uh, just for some, uh, I would say with experience, I find it's a lot easier to understand sarcasm and joking around. And of course, sometimes I do miss obvious jokes, but uh, again, it can be helpful to say like, "Oh, I'm just kidding," or things like that, and then I can pick up on the joke just fine. But even then, I've learned to appreciate these kinds of subtleties, and I know plenty of autistic people can appreciate jokes and sarcasm as well.
In fact, I feel like people with autism have a great sense of humor. A lot of times they're going to say what the rest of us are probably thinking. We just use our filter and they just say what it is because it's literal. That doesn't happen with all people with autism. That is something that a lot of people with autism have to learn. Is okay, that's not appropriate, right? Funny, but not appropriate, maybe. Or not funny in this situation. So it's okay to correct and it's okay to let them know without being totally embarrassing, but just let them know, hey, not okay, and then just move on. We don't need to stay on it. They get it, right? So a lot of this is stuff that's it happens at different times. It's the way they're perceived, and then what really is going on. And then Therese said that I skipped a slide, so I got to go back. I'm sorry, guys. Hold on a second. Where did it go? It was stigma. Oh, there it is. You're right. We did skip it. Sorry about that. So I'm going to let Sheree handle this really fast and just give you some examples of the stigma and the facts of social interaction and social communication. And then we'll have a short little discussion about both of those, if that's okay. So go ahead, Sheree.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. First, introduce myself. My name is Sheree Kabia. I'm an ACC biology student, Access Autism member, and I have autism spectrum disorder and ADHD. A short bit about my journey obtaining an autism diagnosis and how it impacted my college education. I was diagnosed at 39 years old. I'm 41 years old now. And after 25 years in the working world, not to mention a 3-year-long breakdown after that. I am attempting to obtain a biology degree 2 years post-diagnosis. This will be my 3rd attempt at completing college. Sorry, but my first attempt after diagnosis and with accommodations. Obviously, it's a very hard thing for me to talk about. The diagnosis itself provided many answers for my lifelong struggles, relief that I'm not alone, and opened the door for many more questions. I've learned in this short time how accommodations would have supported and facilitated my endeavors, opened additional opportunities, and greatly reduced symptoms of mental health conditions I developed, such as depression and anxiety. Even after disclosing receiving some accommodations, the stigma surrounding ASD and the reduced supports afforded to adults versus youth still negatively impacts my daily life and journey toward my goals as a college student. Despite this, in the years living a life without diagnosis, I hope to take advantage of this. Sorry about that. I now have this answer. Hey, sorry. Stop. The supports I now have to improve my life and my mental health. Prancer, buddy, come here. And to help others that are newly diagnosed through their struggles with ASD as well. Hey, Prancer. It is also my hope that college administrators and educators will continue to evolve their understanding of the gap in supports needed and help fill this void to allow those ASD students who work hard to attain a degree to be able to do so successfully and to the best of their abilities. Accommodations are not special treatment. They are supports needed to enable individuals with disabilities to begin with the same baseline as those without, so that they have an equal opportunity to reach their potential. Now I'd like to turn your attention to the next slide, social interaction and social communication, stigmas versus facts. I'll briefly touch on just a few of these points for the sake of time, but strongly encourage you to read through all of them later. I cannot speak for everyone with ASD, as our own experiences vary, but I'll give some quick examples as a person with ASD in order to provide some context. Being perceived as not caring or understanding, perspective taking is difficult. Sometimes a person may think the same way they do. Difficulty in relating to circumstances or subject matter needs clarification examples. So a personal example of this is people assuming I don't care about their personal struggles that they've shared with me. I may think and worry about that person throughout the following days and weeks, but I had to learn that calling or texting them back or asking how they're doing proves to them that I do actually care quite a lot about what they're going through. Would rather be alone as a stigma, when in fact this is not true. Persons with ASD actually desire to make friends and follow roles. The issue is that we've misplaced the appropriateness of communicating social cues and what language to use, how to approach, what to say, and timing. So, for example, my own experience with telling someone I want to be alone has been perceived as wanting to be alone all the time. This misunderstanding is due to 2 common issues people with ASD face with communication: shutdowns, overwhelm, and differences in conveying thoughts and feelings verbally. I was overwhelmed, close to shutting down at the time. I was not physically or mentally capable of engaging in interaction with anyone. I still want to have a friendship with that person. It just wasn't the right time. And my difficulties with conveying my struggles was compounded by me shutting down. Although I'm a very independent person, I still need friendship and interaction, just as we all do. We just all vary in how much we need individually, whether we have ASD or are neurotypical. And the last example is being self-absorbed as a stigma, when in fact the person with ASD has high interest areas. They're extremely, that they've extensively researched and have become very knowledgeable in their high interest areas. This impacts them in discussions and building, maintaining relationships. Persons with ASD may not be aware they're monopolizing conversations. Visual gestures to have discussions are key, just like Samantha mentioned earlier. Those are very helpful. So as a person with ASD, I've done this myself more times than I can count. Even after realizing I do this, my difficulties with sense of time and self-awareness still lend to my tendency to be unaware or confused by how much is too much in a conversation. This can be compounded by nervousness when meeting a new person or someone who's not supportive of my disability. So once politely redirected, I'm happy to stop and hear about the other person's interests, which in fact I am very interested in. So now if anyone has any questions about this slide or about the last slide, please raise your hand using the raise hand button or unmute yourself. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really great. I appreciate how you described all that. Does anybody have any questions? And we are like hitting the time clock because we're at 2:23 right now. So these slides, like I said, will be available. Again, this isn't always the case, but it is some examples of what might be happening, okay, if you're encountering somebody. And this is not, also this presentation I want to say is not for you to go and assume somebody has autism because they're displaying some of these traits. We don't want to assume anybody's disability. We want to make sure that we're addressing the need of the student, and mostly doing so when the student has disclosed. So we're going to move on because, like I said, we're getting close on time. Dree, you did fine. You did great. Okay, and next up, and if you guys have questions, put them in the chat, and hopefully between all of us, we can get them answered. So I'm going to introduce to you Brenton Kent. He is an Access Autism member and a student. And Brenton is going to be, he's under the Atypical issues in language and communication, and he would like to share his storyboard. Go for it, Brenton.
I am Brenton Kent. I am a member of Access Autism, and I'm a student at ACC. I'm going to share with you how autism affects my communications. I can tell you when I talk others I cannot understand. They do not respond to me. I feel confident. I feel confidence of my confidence turn into sadness. But I want them to act my communication. My confidence turn into my sadness because I am aware of this.
So basically, Brenton is explaining that he understands the difficulty in communication and the difficulty for others understanding him. And speaking about his slide here, he's talking about how it's okay for people to ask him to repeat what he's saying. He is aware that you might not understood him. And the way this happens for him is people either don't respond to what he said or they avoid more engagement with him. And he's aware of it. He understands it. And then it causes his confidence to go down. And then from confidence, it goes to sadness because then he ends up not being heard or his needs aren't being met because he's tried to communicate it. And all it would take is one simple, I didn't understand you. Could you write that down or repeat it for me, please? So we don't want to pass anybody by just because we're perceived as not being able to understand them or they're perceived as not being able to communicate. He could communicate. He just needs to have that little extra nudge to say, you know what, I didn't understand you. Can you please explain it to me further? Or say it again or write it down. Do you have any more to say, Brenton?
Well, I had to try to make sure I understand correctly to my people. I get to answer my friends.
Yes. Does anybody have any questions for Brenton? And we talk about this because society is a little uncomfortable with you know, maybe asking somebody to repeat something, or to just kind of nod or not respond and nod and move on. And what we're doing is we are breaking the trust and the confidence of the student. So Brenton has come up to tell you all that he would rather be asked than nodded at, not understood, or just be overlooked. And that's something that I feel like is very powerful for all of us to know. And it's been some coaching and teaching advocating skills that your voice matters, and it's okay to ask somebody, did you hear me? Would you like me to repeat that? So it's on both sides. The big component of working with people with autism is also helping teach them to advocate.